The climate crisis agenda and where it's all leading, that's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Why some Americans do not see urgency on climate change. That was the headline from a Pew Research report dated August 9th of this year. The subtitle, In-Depth Interviews Find Some Americans Consider Crisis Language Overblown, leading to added skepticism of claims. Take heart, America. This means that more and more Americans are have awakened to the dastardly plot from the globalists to use climate change fear and hysteria to basically control the masses. Before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for faith-based podcasts at Real Life Network. That is the faith-based news outreach of Pastor Jack Hibbs's Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, California church. It's a great endeavor. Real Life Network. You should check it out. They have tons of podcasts and videos putting out the biblical-based truths of modern-day events and news and so forth. You're going to want to check it out. You can also get Bold and Blunt, of course, at WashingtonTimes.com, where you may subscribe to my 3 times a week newsletter. It comes out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and it contains all my commentaries that I write at the Washington Times, as well as my Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcasts. But you can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. I want to play you a clip from the real-life version of a James Bond villain. Listen to this. The question on the table is, what is the fourth industrial revolution? And this is World Economic Forum's Klaus Schwab. He is the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. This is the fourth industrial revolution in his words.
The fourth industrial revolution is a combination of technological breakthroughs which will completely change business models, society, economies. The fourth industrial revolution is coming with enormous speed and will change not only what we are doing, but who we are.
It will change not only what we are doing, but who we are. Who we are. Well, I don't know about you, but I know who I am. I am a child of God, created in God's image to glorify God here on earth. I have a sneaking suspicion that's not what Klaus Schwab means. Here's more. And by the way, this is called Wait Just a Minute. And so what it is a 60-second interview with Klaus Schwab, which is why you may have picked up a little ticking in the background. That's the sound of a second hand ticking down on a clock. Apparently, there's a strict time limit from this sort of thing. This is also from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and it was a few years ago. Around the time of COVID, which is where we got the Great Reset from. Klaus Schwab's phrase to usher in the fourth revolution. Here we go. Will globalization rise or recede going forward is the next question to Schwab.
The world will grow more together in the digital age. We are becoming more interdependent. We will have not less, we will have more globalization. But the question is, how do we master and how do we construct this new type of globalization? I call it Globalization 4.0.
Globalization 4.0. Did you catch his words? How will we construct? How will we master strategize, master plan, top down? Develop this new form of globalization. Who made him God? Aside from himself, apparently. We will have more globalization going forward, he said. Those are his words. You have to listen to these globalists and not dismiss what they say, because they're quite open about their plans for the future. You have to listen to their words, take their words as true agenda, and plan to battle accordingly. I think that's a fault of many in the conservative side of things, because first off, we let the mainstream media dismiss talk of these types of plans, the Great Reset, for instance, as conspiracy, as nothing more than figments of our imagination, as tinfoil hat talk, when all you really have to do is go to the websites, the World Economic Forum website, weforum.org, and you can read in their own words what the Great Reset is. So the first mistake is allowing the media to paint the Great Reset, the Fourth Revolution, talk of total top-down bureaucratic control on the masses as conspiratorial. It's not, right? These are actual plans. And they're moving forward with speed, as Klaus Schwab says. But the second mistake is to fail to see the evil that is contained in such a plot. And really, Christians should know best, right? Revelation, mark of the beast. Can't buy or sell without having the mark. No more borders. A world controller, right? Somebody who controls the world. Somebody who comes in at a time when there is raging chaos and promises peace, peace, peace. 7 years. The 7 years tribulation starts out peaceful, right? And then it becomes hell on earth. So Christians should actually know best to be on guard for those in the world who are talking about total top-down controls. It should ping in your mind as red flag, red flag, red flag. But more than that, just America has been the wall, the stumbling block for globalists forever, really, because America stands distinct and separate from all other nations. And the reason why is because of the concept of American exceptionalism, defined as this: individual rights that come from God, and government there only to preserve and protect those individual rights. To the rest of the world, that's a radical thought. To the rest of the world, that's unheard of, because in their minds, in their governments, in their countries, rights are only what the government gives, and the government controls. The government has all the power. Here in America, it's flipped, and it's rightfully flipped, right? Because we have a system that's based on Christianity and Judeo-Christian principles, where we understand that God made each and every of his creations in his image, planted with the seeds of greatness to go forth and glorify him. And there's an individual relationship with Jesus that goes along with that, right? When you're born, you have a mission on earth to glorify God, and to accomplish that mission, you have to have an individual relationship with Jesus. And so the concept of individualism comes there. We believe here in America that an individual makes the difference. An individual can do great things. Communist countries, Klaus Schwab type people, think that individualism is weak and that things can only be accomplished by the collective and by a carefully guided, controlled collective, which happily for them, they put themselves at the top because they think themselves so much smarter than the average bear out there. Well, America is a country of God-given individualism. And so when we hear things like this from Klaus Schwab and others in his circle, which include many in the Democrat Party, sadly, which include some in the Republican Party today, right? We have to shake our heads and say, no, 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 not in my house, not in America. And so here's one more clip from Klaus Schwab, because I think the last question here gets us to the end of the 60 seconds. And this question: what concerns you about economic inequality? Oh boy, I love it when globalists are asked to weigh in about the concept of inequality. Here we go.
It's a poison for society. We cannot leave people behind. We have to make everything to ensure social cohesion of a society, because social cohesion is a prerequisite for a democratically functioning country.
Social cohesion is a prerequisite for a democratically functioning society. We have to make sure there is social cohesion in order to bring about equality in society. So again, that's code for total top-down control, because who brings about this social cohesion but the global governments, right? That's where he's going with this. So how do you do that? How do you do that? And just to make clear, that last statement of his was one of those examples of the devil's great lie. 90% truth, 10% lie. 99% truth, 1% lie, however you want to look at it. But the fact is, yes, in societies, we do need to make sure people aren't left behind, right? But we don't do that through the government controlling things so much as the government stepping aside and letting Christian principles dominate. The way things are supposed to work, in America at least, is government is limited in power, and it's the churches and the charities and individuals with their relationship with Jesus, doing things out of love for Jesus, who provide for those less fortunate. That's how it's supposed to work. We're not supposed to have all these big government entitlement programs that are basically taking tax dollars from one to give to another, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So that's how it's supposed to work. Of course, the more America grows secular, the more America turns away from God, stops going to church, stops reading the Bible, stops believing in God, the more government grows, right? Because it leaves people out in the cold. When people aren't doing the charitable outreach based on their love for Jesus and love for fellow mankind, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. When that's not taking place, it just creates a void. It creates needs. And government is the one that steps in to provide. So that's how we get socialism and communism and all that growing like a cancer in America. That's how we get somebody like Klaus Schwab talking about the fourth revolution and the need for social cohesion and the need to control top down the masses. That's how we get somebody like that making inroads, right? So how do we get there? How do we get to where Klaus Schwab envisions the world? Well, he does it, we allow it, through fear. Hysteria, fear, emotion-driven agendas. That is a great tool of the globalists. And we saw the success of fear wielded as a tool for control for 3+ years under the coronavirus. We were told to stay home, stay out of school, stay out of work, stay off the streets, stay out of the parks, stay away from the beaches, stay away from everybody. Don't go to church. And God forbid, if you go to church, do not sing. Because when you sing, what comes out of your mouth could be carrying a virus that could spread to somebody else. So we allowed all that to take place. Well, hypocritically, these very people who were shaking their fingers at us and telling us to stay home and stay cowered in the corners in our home were often running to their own parties and rallies and weddings without face masks, without social distancing, right? Maybe with the shot, maybe not with the shot. We don't know. I mean, honestly, just a sidestep. We shouldn't know. That's private medical history. If you're one of those people who runs around and asks people, have you had the shot? Have you had your COVID shot? Stop. It's none of your freaking business, okay? I mean, it's called privacy. But anyhow, we allowed, through fear, that lockdown to occur. And here we go back to climate change. If you go to World Economic Forum and you read through the Great Reset, The coronavirus, Klaus Schwab says, has given an opportunity like no other time in history to bring about a new world order. Only he calls it a great reset. He calls it a fourth revolution. And from the coronavirus is now coming the fear about climate change. We're in a climate crisis. You have to listen to these world bureaucrats, these global bureaucrats, and what they're saying. The world is on fire, the UN chiefs say. We're in a crisis like no other time. We're all going to die. We're all going to die. We're all going to die. So watch the sign, read the tea leaves, and you can see the fear from the coronavirus, which was sort of a testing ground to see how far these globalists could push in terms of controlling the masses. The fear of that is now being slipped rather seamlessly into fear about the climate, as if weather never existed before mankind started driving and flying. The good news, why some Americans do not see urgency on climate change. August 9th, 2023, Pew Research. In-depth interviews find some Americans consider crisis language overblown, leading to added skepticism of claims. This is the wall that the globalists have to overcome, right? America once again stands in the way of their nefarious designs. And we need to keep that up. We need to keep the skepticism. We lost the healthy skepticism under the coronavirus and allowed Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates to tell us what to do, even though every day they switch their narratives. Every minute they change their tune on what to do. And we allowed the government to control us instead of maintaining our individualism, our critical thinking skills, right? We let our God-given individual liberties be handed over on a silver platter to the collectivists. We allowed ourselves to lose healthy skepticism. So let's not do that with the climate change alarmism that's coming. And I have a great guest today who has a lot more to say about this. His name is Jerome Corsi. He's penned this book, The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change, Exposing Climate Lies in an Age of Disinformation. And he laughs at the climate alarmists who say July was the hottest month on record, right? Remember that? Remember the news headlines from just a few weeks back? Oh my gosh, July, the hottest ever. We're all going to die. Jerome Corsi, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is so great to have you here.
It's my real pleasure. Thank you.
So you look at the data from July on climate change and so forth, and you call out the left as perpetrating this big hoax by claiming July 2023 is the hottest month on record. What's going on there?
Well, again, it's rigged data. It's nonsense. The 1930s were much hotter. We had the Dust Bowl in the United States, and you can't just take one month, one date, and say this is the hottest ever. That doesn't work. When you have to look at climate data over time, and over time we've had very hot periods on Earth, we've had very cold periods on Earth, we've had ice ages, we've had little warming periods, the medieval warming period. And none of it had anything to do with carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide tends to follow, not cause, warming.
Carbon dioxide tends to follow warming. That's interesting, because if you listen to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it's the opposite.
Well, I know the left likes to say that the carbon dioxide is the turning knob of Earth's temperature. Well, that's nonsense. Carbon dioxide is about 0.04% of the atmosphere. It's a trace molecule, and water vapor is 70% of all greenhouse gases. By the way, the Earth would be uninhabitable if we didn't have greenhouse gases because too much heat would escape at night. The turning knob of Earth's temperature is the sun, and the climate hysterics don't want to accept that the sun heats the Earth. When the sun's burning hot, Earth is hotter. Right now we're in sun cycle 25, which is warmer. The sun has more sunspots than it did in sun cycle 24. We also have other very powerful forces that humans don't control. We have the El Nino, which is now a current in the Pacific that is coming up, and it causes warming. That's going to make it warmer. These are factors that make it slightly warmer today, but we're in an interglacial warming period. We ought to be pleased that it's warm. Carbon dioxide we exhale, trees absorb. If we're really worried about too much carbon dioxide, plant more trees. This is a very favorable time for humans to exist on Earth, and a little more carbon dioxide is going to make no difference whatsoever.
So the left's view of things is that human activity, particularly development, transportation, have really harmed the environment, ratcheted up climate change emissions and so forth, and that we need to enact curbs on these activities. Is there any truth at all to their line of logic?
No, it's pretty much all nonsense. I mean, as I demonstrate in my book about the truth about energy, climate change, and global warming, the entire movement of this climate change movement started after World War II, and it was basically a depopulationist movement. Paul Ehrlichman was saying we were too many people, overpopulation, population bomb was his book. He combined with John Holdren, who was ultimately going to be Obama's science czar, and they decided that they could just demonize carbon dioxide, they could end capitalism. Because if we can't utilize hydrocarbon fuels, which is the engine of the modern industrial state, well, capitalism would collapse. And this would achieve their depopulation goals of reducing the number of people on Earth. So the entire thing is a neo-Marxist argument, and the way the left wants us to live is to eat bugs, to have no vehicles, not to have gas stoves, to essentially live the way people lived 500 years ago, and 15-minute cities. All this is about social control. It's about allowing the left with their neo-Marxist agenda to have a cultural revolution in the United States and destroy capitalism and impose their totalitarian agenda where true science doesn't matter. All that matters is their narrative, and their narrative is a neo-Marxist narrative aiming to have us live a less productive lifestyle. And that's nonsense to anyone who knows any legitimate climate science.
Which you do, because you have a lengthy expertise in this area, and you have just written a book, The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change, Exposing Climate Lies in an Age of Disinformation. And I want to get into some of those bigger lies that you've found in your research. Before I ask you about that, though, I want to just ask you a follow-up of what you just explained. Don't you think people are awakening to the fact that this whole climate change narrative is nothing but one big deception?
I think people are. I mean, it's, just even a fundamental principle. If you judge these people by what they dictate they want you to do, well, human beings have been eating meat since there have been human beings. We're carnivores. They want us to eat bugs. They want us to use electric vehicles only, and they're mandating electric vehicles. We don't have the infrastructure for charging these vehicles, but they say by EPA, by agency rules, wants to control emissions of cars. So they're going to say by 2030, 75% of all new vehicles have to be electric vehicles. We don't have the infrastructure for that. Besides, it doesn't save carbon dioxide. The batteries take mining rare earth minerals. Charging these cars takes hydrocarbon fuels in order to produce the electricity. They're not efficient. They don't work. The batteries catch fire. They're very expensive. I mean, it's a technology that doesn't work. And when people understand that what the left wants to do doesn't work, then they're going to understand that they were just lied to have this ideological science. If they would just understand that the climate is very complex. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. 80% of Earth's history, there was nothing living on the surface of the Earth. Last 20% of Earth's history, there have been 5 major extinctions. Human beings weren't here. We have nothing to do with the magnitude of forces that control Earth's climate. We're just the latest creatures walking on the surface of the Earth. Earth does not make its climate to our satisfaction. We just happen to be living in a very fortunate interglacial warming period, and we should appreciate it.
So the fact that people are awakening to these lies and deceptions, do you think this is a fight that can be won at the ballot box? Because I see pushback on climate change taking place all the time, especially in conservative circles, but the left never changes its narrative except in terms of calling global warming, global cooling, but the end game is always the same. So is this something that can be won with votes?
Well, if we have legitimate and fair elections, and I think that's going to get contested here especially with the Georgia indictments against Donald Trump. I think he's going to get to present his case about the 2020 election and whether or not it was legitimately conducted. But to answer your question, fundamentally, the whole nature of what we're going through right now is an attempt to control the narrative. The left is saying we're now in global boiling. It's no longer global warming, it's global boiling. Well, that's factually nonsense. Because, as I point out, the Earth has been warmer. We had more carbon dioxide on Earth 600 million years ago than we do today, by a factor of many times. And it didn't control the Earth's temperature, the carbon dioxide. So now the left wants a climate lockdown for President Biden to declare a climate emergency. That just gives them more powers to control. This is a totalitarian movement. They don't free elections. They don't want dissent. They want to control our behavior. And as I emphasize, it's a very dangerous movement because they aim to depopulate. They fundamentally think there's too many people. They think capitalism is wrong. They want to end the use of hydrocarbon fuels because they know hydrocarbon fuels work. They know wind and solar and batteries don't work, not on the scale we need to run today's cities in modern industrial state.
So in your book, The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change, Exposing Climate Lies in an Age of Disinformation, what are some of the most successful lies that the left is telling that maybe need more light shed on them?
Well, one of the big lies is this hockey stick, which Michael Mann came up with. He said that basically Earth's temperature was copacetic. It was perfect until the industrial age. Then we started burning hydrocarbon fuels, and suddenly the Earth's temperature shot up like the blade of a hockey stick. Well, that's nonsense. We know from the ClimateGate, a group of emails that were hacked out of East Anglia, a computer that Michael Mann and the other UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, scientists were using. They admit to falsifying the data. They admit to erasing the little ice age that occurred in the Napoleonic era when the sun was at a minimum, the Maunder minimum. They ignore the medieval warming period. They ignore Earth's 4.6 billion years, which today we have less carbon dioxide by far. They ignore the fact that the Earth's climate is a nonlinear climate. By the mathematics that work climate are nonlinear. So you can't just assume a little more carbon dioxide is going to result in this much warming. The way the climate equations work, the Earth might absorb that extra carbon dioxide, make it greener, but not necessarily warmer.
At this point, between the coronavirus, the so-called science that fueled the coronavirus, tied lockdowns, and climate change lies, the Great Reset, and how we are all rapidly hurtling toward a world where the government will tell us to shut down, lockdown because of the climate and environmental considerations. Should we trust scientists at all anymore?
Well, I think you're getting a whole group of ideological science. This is scientism. This is utilizing science as an authority to tell you lies on fraudulent data. Much of the data, as I'm pointing out, is made up. They lie. They don't care. You get money in universities if you agree with climate change. If you have research that legitimately shows it's all nonsense, you will not only not get funded, you'll probably get fired. It's ideological. This is not science. And I think the American people are realizing this because we're getting engineered into these control movements. It's not about whether or not masks work. There's good science to say they don't work. In fact, they're counterproductive. Our immune system is what's going to protect us. There's good evidence that says some of these virus vaccines could be dangerous, and they weren't. Came out under emergency provisions. They weren't fully tested, and Americans are beginning to wake up to this and realize that science is only legitimate if it's conducted legitimately. If it's conducted ideologically, it's someone using science as a secular religion to force control, totalitarianism, and ultimately reduce the number of people on Earth and make our lifestyle far less beneficial than it is today. You can't support 8 billion people on wind, solar, and battery the way they want a so-called transition to green energy. There's nothing green about solar. It's yellow. And by the way, the sun doesn't shine all the time. You can't generate solar energy at night. We had a solar battery size of a flashlight battery that powered a city. You wouldn't need government subsidies to try to force it on people.
And let me just wrap up with this last question, getting back to the worship, it seems, that's been taking place of scientists. One of the solutions would be to bring truthful science to the forefront, but that's very difficult because it's tied up with funding, as you pointed out. What's one possible solution? So lockdown, so deceptive science isn't able to make such inroads in America any longer.
Well, I've just written an article. There'll be at AmericanThinker.com. Some of the top climate scientists. These are professors emeritus in Princeton and Harvard. Will Happer and a gentleman named Linzer. They published what's a legal brief, and they're basically saying these agencies have Supreme Court decisions that say that the agencies have to be working on truthful science, which means it's open to objection. It has to consider all options. They lay out a scientific argument that that the science is faulty, carbon dioxide is not the driving factor in Earth's temperature, and that this agenda will ultimately kill millions of people because it's aimed at denying us the nitrous oxide and other things we need to do fertilizer. And they are getting prepared to challenge the EPA in court. I think legitimate scientists need to use legitimate science and file Supreme Court cases or cases in the federal courts to block these agencies who are implementing regulations based on faulty science, and they are not driven by Congress. These are these agencies on their own unelected authority making up these rules.
I think that is an excellent action to take. And you say people can read more about it at American Thinker. You have an article there?
It's going to be published. It should be published in the next few days.
Okay.
I've written a whole series of articles on American Thinker. If you read those together with my book on climate change, I think you're going to see just how faulty this climate hysteria is. It's a secular religion masquerading as science.
That's a good way to put it. It's astonishing, as a matter of fact. And the book, again, The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change, Exposing Climate Lies in an Age of Disinformation. Thank you for writing it. It's much needed at this time. And thank you for being on Bold and Blunt, Jerome.
My great pleasure. Thank you very much.
And that's another Bold and Blunt. If you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at Edify.app, the online platform for faith-based podcasts, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, where you may also subscribe to my 3 times a week newsletter. Comes out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and, of course, wherever podcasts are offered. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.